Greetings, everyone. This is Brett, the Faithless Warrior. So nice to infiltrate your podcast world tonight, or today, whenever you're listening. So I'm going to get right to the point here. I've been a little busy lately, haven't had time to do a podcast, but don't worry, I'm back on. Okay, so I'm driving down the interstate between Chattanooga and Atlanta, and there's a billboard that says, "Every knee shall bow and every tongue will confess that Jesus Christ is Lord." And I thought to myself, how many times have I heard that? That's from Philippians in the Bible. I'm pretty sure it's Philippians. I'm not looking it up at the moment, so if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. But I rarely am when it comes to the Bible. Have I ever been wrong when it comes to... I take that back. I have. So anyway, every knee will bow and every tongue will... Okay, if you talk to a Christian, they'll tell you what that means is, whether you believe it now or not, you will believe it one day, and then the Bible says you will bow down to him. It may be 5 seconds before he throws you into hell, but you will bow down to him. Now, wait a second. What would be the penalty if I'm being told that I'm on the way to hell because I didn't bow down to him before I died? What would be the penalty if I refused to bow down to him then? I guess no Christian has really thought that one through, have they? I don't think I necessarily will confess him as Lord if he's not my Lord, if I'm being thrown into hell. But don't you worry, I'm not going to hell, and neither are you, because there is no such place. In fact, one day I'm actually going to do a podcast on hell. It would be kind of fun to do. Okay. So the strong implication is that once you die, it's over. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell a little anecdotal story. And I'm going to point out the massive flaw in that. I love to point out massive flaws in the Bible without mentioning, well, this contradicts that. I go beyond that. I go a little deeper, and I point out the entire logical flaw in the entire system. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you the story of Mack and Zack. Now, Mack and Zack are two twins. Mack was born first, so he got the alphabetical listing of Mack first, and then his mom gave birth to Zack 16 minutes later, so she named him Zack. So Mack and Zack are very close growing up. They did not grow up in a Christian family or any kind of religious family, and they don't really have much exposure, if any, to God. They live in a small town up north, and most of the town's not very religious either. There is one church there. I mean, the town's only got like 2,300 people, and there's one church, and there's another one way, way out in the country that hardly anyone goes to except the Pentecostals. But anyway, it's really, their life is very... they're happy. They're happy doing what they do. They play a little baseball. They play different sports growing up. And religion never really played a part in their life. Now, they had a few friends at school that invited them to church here and there. And they just respectfully declined. There was always something else going on. A lot of times on Sunday, they would go out to the lake and do a little fishing, catch a little bass, a few crappies, some brim, occasional catfish. You know the drill. Oh, you're not all fishermen, are you? You're missing out. Anyway, Mack and Zack are really good guys. They've never really done anything wrong. They never hurt anybody. They just never really found any reason to be religious, nor have they ever really attended church, except on an occasional barbecue. They've stopped by a few times. The church invited the community. But they just never really knew much about the entire religion of Christianity, except just hearing little bits and pieces from other kids, but not really understanding any of the full story. And also, they had no real reason to believe any of it was true or false. They just didn't. They were indifferent on the subject. It never really clicked with them. So basically, they're like many average Americans, especially from the northern side of the country. If you're from the South, you probably got exposed to a lot more religion than Mack and Zack. But here's what happened to Mack and Zack. One night they went out for dinner, and they sat down and they had a nice steak and baked potatoes and salad. And Mack drove to the restaurant, and it was agreed that Zack would drive home. They just like to alternate driving. They both like to drive, and sometimes they both like to sit in the passenger seat and just send texts. So Mack was all set to drive, and he said, "Hey, Mack, can you do me a favor? Can you drive home? I need to send a couple of important texts. Would you mind? Max says, hey, man, no problem at all. I wouldn't mind driving at all. I mean, you got some texts to send? Not a problem. So being the good guy he was, Mack got in the driver's seat and Zack got in the other seat. Well, when they were driving home, they were going down a road that was dark and narrow and curvy, and this other car, this semi-truck, came around a curve and wove right into their lane and slammed into them. I mean, a horrific crash. Now, what happened was Zack got thrown out of the car. During the impact, his seatbelt on the passenger side was faulty, and neither one actually knew about it. But because of the way the collision happened, the seatbelt gave way, and Zack went right through the windshield. Mack stayed in the car and just got... It was pretty bad. So let me fast forward a few minutes. Another car drives by and sees the accident and calls the paramedics. Paramedics rushed to the scene, and because of the direction they came from, they saw Zack, the one who got thrown out of the car first. They found him and laid in the field. He was bloody, he was cut up, but he was not doing too bad. But the paramedic, at least Zack could talk. He was bloody and messed up, but at least he could talk. So the paramedic got to the scene. He took one look at the car and thought if there was anybody in there, he probably wouldn't even survive. Little did he know that Mack was in there, and Mack was still alive a little bit. But the paramedic was by himself that night. Another paramedic was on the way, but he was by himself for the moment. He just happened to be closest to the scene. So the paramedic got to thinking about something. He said, these two guys may not live very long. They're really messed up. I can see Zack is messed up. He didn't know his name. He can see the guy. And he says to himself, I know it's not in my job title, but as a Christian, I really feel like I should share the gospel of the good news of Jesus Christ to these guys, because if something happens and they die and they don't know Jesus, I don't want them to go to hell. I mean, the paramedic's just doing what he feels is right. You can't blame the guy. So he walks over to Zack, and Zack's bloody, and he's in pain, and he talks to him about Jesus. He tells him, he spends about 3-4 minutes telling him the entire story. And he says, Zack, would you like to confess Jesus Christ as your Lord and ask him to forgive you of all your sins, everything you've ever done wrong right now? And Zack says, that kind of makes sense. I'm in a pretty bad situation. I think I do believe your story, and I would like to confess Jesus as Lord and ask him to forgive me. So right then and right there, Zack becomes a Christian, and he goes to heaven. Because a few minutes later, he dies. I should mention that first. First he died, then he went to heaven, not in the reverse order. So, the paramedic, he runs over to the vehicle, and he sees that Mack is really mangled. I don't want to describe how bad Zack was. Horrible head injury, massive chest injury. As soon as he gets over there, Mack passes away. Mack dies. So here's what happens. Zack goes before God, and God says to him, well done, my good and faithful servant. You may enter into the kingdom of heaven forever and enjoy my love forever. And Zack says, that's great. God, may I ask you something? God says, sure, ask away. Zack says, what about my brother Mack? How is he doing? God says to him, well, he's in hell right now. He's burning for all eternity because he did not do what you did. He did not confess me as Lord. So Zack is horrified, absolutely horrified. So he asks God another question. He says, well, what exactly happened to him? Did he die on impact or what? God says, well, he lived a couple minutes, not as long as you did, but then he bled to death and he passed away. and he went straight into into the kingdom of hell. He's burning right now. He's never getting out. Eternal destiny is done. Zack is devastated, and he says, let me ask you this, God. If he and I were sitting in separate seats, if I were driving and he were in the passenger seat, what would have happened? God says the exact opposite would have happened. He would have lived, and yes, in case you're asking this question to yourself, he would have become a Christian because the paramedic would have got to him first. It's a good thing that seatbelt was faulty. That's why he got thrown out. Otherwise, you both would have died almost instantly on impact. But because the seatbelt was faulty, he went through the windshield and he survived. He would have survived, like you did. So Zack, again, is horrified. He says, so you mean to tell me because we switched seats, I'm going to spend eternity in heaven, and my brother Mack is going to spend eternity in hell? God says that's correct. That's how it works. Okay, story over. If you're a Christian right now, do you see a problem with this story? Do you see a massive problem with this story? Now, I realize I made the story up, and you realize that too. But the story I'm making a point of something that Christians actually believe. They believe, regardless of the reason, regardless of your life, if you confess Jesus at the last moments of your life, you're good. You could slaughter 10,000 children and not even be an Israelite in the Israelite army, and that's all fine. And that's all. I mean, it's not fine, but you shouldn't have done that. But if you confess Jesus as Lord in the last second, you get to go to heaven. But if you lived an almost perfect life, if you did nothing but help people and think of other people first in everything you did, in the last minute you die and you didn't get a chance to hear the gospel because you happened to be sitting in the driver's seat doing your brother a favor because he wanted to send some text, and you were sitting in the driver's seat and you got smashed by a semi-truck because the driver ran over the line, well, you're just out of luck. See, if you're a Christian, that's exactly what you believe. You believe that Mack died, and then he went before God for a few moments, and he confessed that Jesus Christ is Lord, because the Bible says every tongue will bow and every mouth will confess. Every knee will bow and every tongue will confess that Jesus Christ is Lord. See, Mack may have been forced to do that, but what would be the point? Because it was too late for Mack. See, Zack, he's good. The paramedic got to him, and the paramedic was trying to get to both of them. And because these boys had so much in common, and they were raised the exact same way, and they were both open-minded, they both would have accepted Jesus on the spot. But because Mack died a few minutes too early, he has to spend eternity in hell for burning and burning and burning and burning. And when he's been there 10 trillion years, he's barely begun, because he's going to be burning and burning and burning and burning. Do you see the problem with this story? See, okay, Christians strongly believe that when you die, you're going to know the truth. You're going to know the truth just right after you die. But here's the problem with that. If you're God and you want people to know the truth about you, tell me the difference between your heart beating and your heart not beating if you're going to tell somebody the actual eternal truth that they need to hear. Why is there something different on this side of my heartbeat? While my heart's beating, I got to get it all right, even though I got no evidence for it. But when my heart stops beating, God is more than willing to explain all the celestial mysteries of heaven and earth and hell when it won't matter anymore, when it's completely too late. I mean, if you give it a little bit of thought, it is asinine to think that a loving God would do such a thing. I'm going to leave y'all in the dark for thousands of years. I'm going to leave this holy book that you may or may not believe, that you have absolutely no reason to believe other than the fact that it makes you feel good and gives you something to think about. but I'm not going to give you the whole truth no matter how bad you want it. But after you die, oh, you're going to know everything. Of course, it won't matter to you then. You'll be dead and you'll be on the way to hell or on the way to heaven if you got it right the first time. But if you didn't get it, but even if you're on the way to hell, I got some good news for you. At least you're going to know why. Because you weren't raised in the right place at the right time and get the right message and believe the right thing. You were not fully convinced when you were alive. But now that your heart stopped beating, I'll give it all to you now. I'll go ahead and explain the whole thing. It's almost like one of those James Bond movies where the villain has got Bond in front of a gun or tied down to a table, and he explains the whole great plan to Bond, even though he's about to kill him. Of course, now these are movies, and Bond always got away, but at least the villain had the good sense to tell him what he was going to do, and that was more for the audience. But if you think about how crazy it would be for a loving God to say, Zack, you got saved because you went through the windshield because of a faulty seatbelt because the paramedic got to you first. But Mack, you're out of luck, man. You were sitting in the wrong seat. You died too quickly. You're going to burn. I'm sorry, folks. If you believe that, you've been brainwashed. You've been brainwashed to the nth degree. And I'm not going to apologize for my language here, but you're cray-cray. You've lost your mind if you actually believe that. You may not have totally lost your mind, but I'm proving to you that you have been brainwashed. And that's all I got to say. And the story of Mack and Zack is over. I know this is a short podcast, but I want you to think about that. When somebody tells you every knee will bow and every tongue confess, including you, send them this podcast of the story of Mack and Zack, and then try to get God to explain how he's justified in Mack being killed because he was sitting in the wrong seat and Mack going to hell for that. All right. This is Brett the Faithless Warrior signing off. Have a great one.